Welcome and thanks for joining me. It's Monday evening, November 9th, 2020, and the year of the Karen. And this may end up, while I'm waiting for people to join us here, this may end up being the most important year that we've ever had, the most important year of our republic. Or it might be the beginning of an end, depending on what happens next. I think the point is, as far as the way I'm seeing things now, is you can't get away from the fact that there have been 71 million plus legal votes for President Trump. For their votes to count, and all votes, all legal, legitimate votes should count, we have to get rid of all the mail-in ballots that belong to dead people or from otherwise unverifiable people. We also have to give Donald Trump, as a presidential candidate, his campaign, the opportunity to challenge these mail-in votes that may have been from verifiable people, but were against the existing election law rules as established by the state legislatures under their existing state laws. So two different issues. One is we have dead people voting, and where that can be proven, those votes should be thrown out. And two, where alive people voted, but voted in such a way as they wouldn't be counted in a normal election in that particular state because they didn't follow the rules enacted by the legislature. So those are two different things. And I think we're seeing litigation on both of those topics from President Trump. But the overall principle is that 71 million people voted for him. And if we allow votes that were cast by dead people, that were cast fraudulently, or votes that really should be illegal under existing law, then you're taking away votes from the people who did follow the rules. If we look at the numbers just alone, 71 million people, that's still 4 million more people than voted for President Trump last year in 2016. I turn the lights on in this room when I don't like them off. I don't like the fluorescent lighting above me. I always have it off. I have 10 or 20 lamps around. That's how I like to do it. But it just wasn't looking right. It was screwing with my camera. So I tried turning the lights on, and that usually bothers me. And hopefully the stream is holding up here. I had been going live from my other office that has much better internet. So let me know if it's getting blurry. Hopefully I hardwired it in just for this. So hopefully it should work. Let's see. So I think I'm going to give you kind of my take on what I think's going on and what people are misunderstanding. So again, 4 million people voted for President Trump this year, then voted for him last year. And regardless of what half the country thinks or what all of the news media thinks, CNN or Fox News, they have no legal standing whatsoever to declare the winner of the presidential election or to certify a single vote. We have to look at the law. We have to look at the Constitution. We have to look at the state laws. How is this election to be won or not won? Well, we have to look at the state laws, at the state secretaries of state in these battleground states, and then possibly to the courts that may be deciding any challenges to those state laws or the lack of state laws regarding this 2020 election. Just a few hours ago, Kayleigh McEnany had a press conference, and I have a quote that was, very telling. This is what she said, and it's a good point. There is only one party that opposes voter ID, verifying signatures, citizenship, residency eligibility. There's only one party in America trying to keep observers out of the counting room. You don't take these positions because you want an honest election. And that's a great point, is who has been challenging the safeguards being put in place to make sure that only citizens are voting or that only residents of those particular states are voting. It's only been the Democrat Party that have been challenging those efforts. Why would anybody be against one of the two parties being allowed to be in the room where the ballots are being counted? There's only one reason why you wouldn't want the Republican observers in the room in Philadelphia where ballots are being counted. That's because you don't want them to see what you're doing. The Heritage Foundation president, Kay James, had another statement that I think is different, but it's not what you'll hear in the media. It's not a rush to call the election in one way or the other. She said that the American people deserve and demand election results that they can trust. When the litigation in the critical battleground states has been settled and all the allegations of fraud and irregularities have been investigated, that's what they'll have. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. Recounts and pending litigation must be resolved to the satisfaction of the political parties and the Americans who support them and voted for them. Election integrity is a pillar of our republic, and without it, we won't last. For the sake of this election and all of the subsequent elections in generations to come, we must come to a legitimate conclusion. Anyone rushing to the finish, including the media and those with a vested interest in the outcome, are doing a disservice to the country. Like Vice President Biden has said, democracy sometimes requires a little patience. I'm going to go into something that you may have heard before, but I think the vast majority of people are misunderstanding the concept of how constitutionally the presidential elections work. Now, what about, as a side note, what about the Department of Justice? What about Bill Barr? Fact is they have failed America. Now it's going to be up to, ironically, it's going to be up to the lawyers. And it's going to be up to all of us who want to make sure that this is a fair election. What can all these 71 million people do to make sure that their votes did count, that their state votes did count? Well, I was listening to Steve Bannon earlier today, and you'll learn more from him in 5 minutes than you'll learn watching a month of some of the big networks, or heck, a year. And he had, I think, some good advice, is that you have to be proactive. He said, be a soldier in the psychological information warfare that we're currently in. Start connecting with people by pushing out this social content about the truth. Don't let the social media engines and the television media push the narrative just themselves, because they're pushing out a false narrative. But the truth is written in black and white in our Constitution, in our laws. And they're pushing out a false narrative that the election's over. It's not over. Joe Biden is not the president-elect. Do we need to have another election, a do-over, another vote? No, we don't. You know why? Because it's not about the vote totals. It's about winning the certification of the votes in these battleground states. Because there can be no president-elect without a certification of the votes in a particular state. There can be no electoral votes cast in that state. Without certification, no electoral votes. You become president of the United States not by the votes directly from the people. You become president by winning the states, a majority of the states, not a majority of the people. And how does this work? 50 states, and there's 538 electoral votes. So therefore, to win the states, you need 270 electoral votes. That's just a simple majority of 538. And where does 538 come from? That is the number of senators of each state and the number of Congress critters in each state. And so if you have If you have 3 congressmen and 2 senators, like we do in West Virginia, we only have 5 electoral votes. But if you have a bunch of congressmen, though you still only have 2 senators, you're going to have a lot more electoral votes. So it's pretty simple. So we don't need another vote. We don't need any more votes. We had a vote on Tuesday, and President Trump won that vote. If you can't certify that vote, then you don't have electors to cast electoral votes. If you don't have electors casting the electoral votes, then, as I'll describe, it has to go to the House of Representatives for a vote under our Constitution. And that would be really ugly for the Democrat Party. And I think that's a lot of why you see them trying to push this thing through as quickly as possible. But there's no rush. There's plenty of time. And I think obviously don't speak for the opinions of the Trump campaign, but I think that's what they're doing, is they're just following the process. And I don't believe it was until today, November 9th, 4 years ago, that President Trump was even declared by anybody to be the official president-elect. Although it may have been called by the media, it wasn't official then. So none of this is exactly new. The fact is this is a close election. This is a close election. But when the battleground states have not been decided, and we have this never before seen influx of all these mail-in votes, which usually would be in violation of these state legislatures, we have to take it slow and let the challenges to the votes, challenges to the process, go through the legal proceedings in those states. A lot of people don't understand the basic history of federalism and how our country works. What is the United States, or what are the United States? So we're unlike every other country, any other country in the world. We really don't have a national central government. And we basically have this federal entity which was created by the states, by the people of the states, originally 13, now 50, in order to help those states manage their own affairs, to manage this union that the states had created. So how do the states, this union of states, manage themselves with 50 different states? Well, every 2 years, they have a Congress. They call it Congress of the States, convened in the federal capital of the United States, Washington, D.C. The word Congress means what? Conference. So Congress is really, it's not just this national entity that has nothing to do with the states. That is our conference of our states. So West Virginia, when we send our 3 Congress critters to Washington, D.C., every 2 years, we're sending them as our delegates to the Conference of the States. That's how all 50 states get together and establish whatever the policies is going to be. So people don't understand, because they're not taught in school anymore, the concepts of how our government is run. And that's basically the concept of federalism. So you have this federal entity of this U.S. government. It has some basic powers that are necessary, that were conferred to it by the Constitution. And then you'll see that everything else is sovereign to the states. And that's going to play an important part in what happens here with this election. So let's look at what the federal government is able to do and what it's not able to do. Well, there are 4 basic domains of the federal government, and it makes sense why it was designed this way. Number 1, defense policy. So it's the number 1 responsibility of Congress, of this Conference of the States, to establish the policy and the funding for our mutual defense, our military. Secondly, we have the monetary policy. So we have a common currency throughout the 50 states. We have the Federal Reserve Bank, which governs the dollar, but much of the economy is left to the states. But we have this policy of, what money we're going to use and the policies surrounding it that obviously has to be a federal concern if we're to operate as one nation. Third, it's within the domain of the federal government to manage the foreign affairs. We don't want 50 different foreign ministers to every country that we're trying to deal with. That wouldn't work for obvious reasons. We need one foreign minister that's guided by the policy of the executive branch and with the input that Congress is allowed to provide. Again, the Conference of the States. So foreign affairs, monetary policy, military, and what's left? Well, we have lastly the regulation of trade and commerce between the 50 states, because we can't have one state dictate unfair commerce terms between the other states, or a group of states teaming up on some other states. For obvious reasons, that would cause problems, probably civil war. So those are the four basic domains of federal sovereignty. So no state can pass a law that undermines the federal policy in any of those four areas. Then the way we're set up, everything else other than those four things are supposed to be left to the states, everything. So healthcare, internal security, energy, education, it's supposed to be everything else automatically reserved to the states, to the state legislatures. Now, since Congress is a conference of the states, through congressional action, we have changed some of that. We have taken what was historically a states' right sovereignty issue, and we have created some sort of federal legislation which affects it. And most notably, that would be like civil rights. So pre-1964, civil rights are going to be a state sovereignty issue. If you're in a southern state, pre-1964, whatever your civil rights laws are, you could have Jim Crow laws. Obviously, we had a civil war. We went through all the Jim Crow era. 1964, you had the Federal Civil Rights Act, and that created basically a federal mandatory minimum status quo that applied in all 50 states, and no state could go below it. So no discrimination on skin color, etc. Even though that is within your authority as a state sovereignty, since our Conference of States enacted this legislation in 1964, we've all agreed to be on the same page about no discrimination policies and so on. So civil rights has become federalized to a certain extent. You also have healthcare. Look at Obamacare. So Congress unwisely and through some lies told, many lies told, to a certain extent, federalized healthcare on many levels with Obamacare and some things before that. You have education. Public education has been federalized through federal legislation in a number of ways. And you have other things, such as, to a certain extent, some taxation or law enforcement, some voting rights have been federalized via federal law. But for the most part, all of those things are still mostly within the domains of the state, or they're supposed to be. And that brings us to voting laws. So you have both federal and you have state voting laws. Now, federal laws will determine a lot of times things like eligibility. Who's to run for an office at the federal level? If you want to run for Congress, be a member of the House of Representatives, then you need to be 25 years old. You need to be 30 years old for the Senate. Those are federal eligibility requirements. Now, the state governments generally are allowed to to write all the other laws with regards to their elections. So voter registration, campaign finance, primaries, caucuses, how that's going to work, deadlines, political parties, and what you have to do to get on the ballot. All of these things generally are all going to be state laws. And then within those states, you have roughly 89,000 different local governments, political subdivisions, cities, counties, towns. And they're going to have their own elections, and they're going to be involved in carrying out the logistics of all these elections. So the point is that the Constitution provides that the states, the state legislatures, will prescribe what the election laws are as far as how they're going to be carried out. Congress may determine eligibility requirements, but the Constitution gives state legislatures the right or reserves them the right to all of the logistics issues as far as how the elections are going to be carried out. That's Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution. And it reads like this: the time, places, manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time make law, alter these regulations except to the places of choosing senators. So the key phrase there in the elections clause, Article 1, Section 4, is by the legislature thereof. Shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. So what we're seeing now is elections that were held in some manner other than as prescribed by the state legislatures. To the extent that that has been done, it's absolutely not just a good idea to challenge that in court by the Trump campaign, but it's the duty of a president to see that the elections are held as prescribed by the Constitution. If you take an oath to uphold the Constitution and defend the Constitution, well, that's what the Constitution says. It says by the legislature. So what happens if just the shit hits the fan completely, which is, it appears to be the way we're headed? We have the 12th Amendment. Again, the Constitution holds all the answers no matter what happens with the facts. So it's easy, again, for us to forget that when we vote for president, we're voting for electors from our state, electors, who will then pledge or who have pledged to support the candidate that we favor. Again, civics education is not what it used to be, or it's not taught at all. When was the 12th Amendment passed? How did this become law? 1803. 1803. Passed by Congress, the Conference of States, 1803, ratified the next year, 1804. And it's interesting why we did it, because we had an election, one of our very first presidential elections in 1800, where the shit hit the fan then. They had all sorts of problems. It's beyond the scope of this discussion, but it's really interesting, where you had an incumbent for the first time president defeated in John Adams. But there was a reason, because it wasn't working out like it was supposed to. And we had no way really of anticipating that. But we designed, or our founding fathers designed, this document to be capable of being amended. They didn't anticipate that the Supreme Court or the federal courts would treat it as a living, breathing document and amend it any way they want. But they did provide for the ability for it to be actually amended. First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, though the first 10 are the Bill of Rights, and they were included prior to ratification. Anyways, the 12th Amendment basically it established the Electoral College and provided that each state must appoint electors equal to the total number of House and Senate members in their state, like I already explained, and that they'll vote for two persons. And that is confusing, but it basically means the president and the vice president. So the 12th Amendment specifies that, how the the president, vice president to be selected, but should neither candidate obtain the votes of a majority of the electors, and this, we didn't anticipate there would be just two parties, Republican and Democrat, and that's it. I mean, there may have been 3 or 4 parties. So if anyone didn't get a majority, didn't get to what is now 270, then it goes to the House of Representatives. And what are they getting? What is that 270? What needs to get to 270? That is electoral votes. Electoral votes. Therefore, if no electoral votes equaling 270, then the election goes to the House of Representatives. That's why I say we don't need another vote. We have a vote. If for whatever reason the electoral votes cannot be certified to the amount of 270, then the election has to go to the House of Representatives as per the 12th Amendment. And if that happens, then you get the smaller states like us in West Virginia that now we have a superpower. We have super voting privileges at that point because the House vote is by state and not by representative. And that gives equal weight to all states. Even California has equal weight to West Virginia, the smaller, less populated states. And it makes it more likely that the ultimate winner is not going to be whoever obtains the popular vote. As a side note, the 12th Amendment also sort of came up in the 2000 election. And it also says that it kind of indirectly says that the president and vice president can't be from the same state. And there in 2000, you had vice presidential candidate Dick Cheney, who lived in Texas and voted in Texas. And then you had George W. Bush, who lived in Texas and he voted in Texas. And although they weren't sure whether or not this was actually going to be a problem under the 12th Amendment, Cheney moved his residency to Wyoming, where he had lived before. Again, just a side note. So that's the actual process, is certification of votes by the states under the state law as prescribed by their state legislators. It doesn't matter what the popular vote was. It doesn't matter what the vote has been reported as in any particular state. Every state has its own legal process for certifying elections. So if there's a challenge to the certification or an allegation of fraud or a recount or whatever, there's been no certification. So there is no President-elect Biden because there haven't been any certifications. There haven't been any electoral votes that have been cast so far. There's been a lot of voter fraud allegations. And for the most part, the mainstream media has just laughed at it. They've dismissed it. And it's, in particular, Fox News. They just sort of scoff at it. It's bizarre that we spent the last 4 years discussing Russia, even though Russia had, I haven't heard one person describe how Russia changed their mind and convinced them to vote for President Trump. I haven't seen any evidence of one vote being changed by Russia. And yet we spent the last 4 years and we hamstrung President Trump's first 4 years over Russia. And now, in the current environment we're in, we have all this chicanery that's appearing. And the media won't even look at it. They won't look at it at all. And they just ask, well, where is the proof? Where's the proof? Well, the proof is coming out. And unfortunately, I do have to work my day job. So I'm sure there's a lot that I don't know about that came out. But just look at Pennsylvania. According to Rudy Giuliani, they have substantial amounts of evidence already in Pennsylvania of voter fraud affecting hundreds of thousands of votes in Pennsylvania. He said, I believe it was today, that they already have 60 or 70 witnesses who are ready to testify as to fraud in Pennsylvania. And we're asked for evidence, or they're asked for evidence. Well, what is evidence? You have two types of evidence: direct evidence, and then you have circumstantial evidence. Well, what is direct evidence? That is witness testimony. So if you're asking for evidence, if you're asking for direct evidence, that is witness testimony. So here is, but witness testimony takes time. You have to get into court. So they're interviewing witnesses, they're gathering evidence. Gathering evidence takes time. He also said that for 24 hours, the Democrats in Philadelphia or in Pennsylvania prevented Republican election observers from entering the room in which poll workers were counting over 135,000 late arriving ballots. And they did so even though state law in Pennsylvania states that all represented parties have an absolute right to observe the counting. And Giuliani argued that this secretiveness was because Democrats were engaged in chicanery to overcome Trump's then 700,000 vote advantage. Giuliani said that in Pittsburgh, while Democrats counted 300,000 ballots, they forced Republicans to stand so far away from the counting that they were unable to see anything. So the Trump team got a court order mandating that they allow them closer to look at them, and they still didn't comply with the court order. So they're alleging violations of Pennsylvania law when it comes to elections, that there were disparate treatments in different parts of Pennsylvania, whereas Republican observers were kept away in Democrat areas, and Democrat voters were not kept away in Republican areas. Also in Pennsylvania, which obviously is a key state when it comes to litigating all this fraud, they've alleged 450,000 mail-in ballots that they set. Strike that. The ballot counters separated 450,000 mail-in ballots from their envelopes, making it impossible to tell whether they were valid. So one person, for instance, could have filled out multiple ballots. Both sides should be observing. But the facts show that Republicans were barred from observing. And why? As Kayleigh McEnany said, there's only one party that has been trying to keep the public or the Republicans from watching. And why? Then there were late mailed ballots that postal workers backdated, according to Giuliani. He said he believed that this affected 2,000 to 3,000 votes in Pennsylvania and in Michigan, although it could be a bigger issue. So they did file suit in Pennsylvania, and they had alleged in the lawsuit that they were not allowed equal access to 682,000 tallied outside viewers. 682,000 votes that were tallied while the Republican viewers were not allowed to be in the presence where it was happening. So like I said, the lawsuit, what is it asking for? It's asking for an injunction for a court order to stop the Secretary of State in Pennsylvania from continuing in the process where they're trying to certify those votes. Like I said, if you stop the certification, you stop the casting of any electoral votes. So as much as CNN, as much as Fox News wants to put their graphics up with the fireworks and talk about President-elect Biden, it's just that. It's just smoke and mirrors. Because if there's no certification in Pennsylvania, if a court orders them to stop their certification process until the litigation is resolved, then there are no electoral votes coming out of Pennsylvania. That's just the way it is if we're following the Constitution. In Luzerne County, I believe that's Pennsylvania. Speaking of where is the Department of Justice, at least there was a letter from the DOJ, the U.S. DOJ, to the Luzerne County, I think they call it Bureau of Elections, detailing that there were a bunch of military ballots that were found just thrown out. So that's not coming from the Trump campaign. The DOJ clearly won't do what Trump asked them to do, but that's coming from a federal prosecutor at the DOJ. So there are a lot of issues in Pennsylvania that even the DOJ are looking into. There was a story in the Washington Times that came out a couple days ago that there was a mail carrier in Pennsylvania who says that he was ordered to collect late ballots. And they even mention his name. Richard Hopkins lives in Erie, Pennsylvania. He heard a supervisor talking about the backdating operation and that letter carriers were told to pick up ballots through Friday, even though under Pennsylvania's current law, ballots were supposed to have been mailed by Tuesday. This is what he said. Postmaster Rob Weisenbach directed my coworkers and I to pick up ballots after Election Day and provide them to him, Mr. Hopkins said in an affidavit. So he's already put this under oath in an affidavit, which is punishable by perjury. I'm sure if Biden wins, that poor guy will get thrown in prison for perjury, I'm sure. So backdating ballots at polling stations, and we're not going to let the Republicans watch. How is it bad for anybody that we ensure that only legal U.S. citizens are voting? Because what happens if you have somebody who's not a citizen voting? Well, he's just canceled out one of our votes. Why is it bad that if state law says that both sides get to watch the counting, why is it bad to stop one side from watching? There's no legitimate reason. Let's look at Michigan. There was a from the press conference today in Wayne County, Michigan. There were poll watchers who were denied access. The poll workers that were on the inside that were denying the Republicans access were blocking the windows. They were padlocking doors. There's reports that they were intimidating people. Already they've collected 131 affidavits sworn under oath. That's what an affidavit is. An affidavit is something that you either write out or you sign that's typed up and it's notarized. And then it's filed with a court or can be filed with a court. And that says, under penalty of perjury, I hereby attest to the following. And the purpose for affidavits is usually to give a preview to a court of what your testimony is going to be. And it's a preview because it's credible. Why is it credible? Because it's given under oath, just like you're testifying in court. So already they've gathered 131 affidavits. Now that is direct evidence. That is direct evidence from Michigan. They filed 2 lawsuits today in Detroit, including a whistleblower suit in the Eastern District of Michigan. So there's a canvass process in each of these states and a certification process for a reason, so that there could be challenges if there are issues that pop up. And the fact is that we should all be alarmed by this. There's even just in Detroit, hundreds of instances where election workers were being illegally kicked out, challenged, where the people doing the counting are wearing Biden shirts. And then once they kick out the Republicans, they cheer. And that's who are counting the votes. There was a technical issue in Antrim County, Michigan. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it. Antrim County, Michigan. Election officials wrongly gave Joe Biden a 3,000 vote lead, marking an incorrect tally of 20% of that county's entire electorate. A later recount corrected the tally and put President Trump ahead by 2,500 votes. So these things need to be, there is no rush. There is no rush. All of this can be done. There's plenty of time. There is no downside to any American, to anybody, to making sure that no votes that were by fraudulent means or by dead people should have been counted, or no votes that were in violation of the law are counted. Let's see. Magus, what's fair is fair. That's true. Trump's lawyers might win. It's a stacked Supreme Court in his favor. You know, of course, the historical the historical track record for this is is that a lot of times it doesn't go that way, because you don't really know who somebody is until it comes down to the vote. Look at John Roberts. You never know, because people are always positioning themselves to get onto the Supreme Court. Then once you're on, you're on. You can be whoever you want to be. So let's see. We don't know that for sure, but it's certainly a possibility. Let's see what's going on in Georgia with the votes. Well, I believe that there are recounts ongoing in Georgia. Yes, Pennsylvania has a Lucerne County. Well, I thought it was with a Z. That's why I'm pronouncing it. If it's not with a Z, then I blame the federal prosecutors, because that's how it was spelled. I looked at the letter itself. They mucked up the Postal Service in Pennsylvania. It's why they did what they did. Yeah, and hence the whole problem with mail-in votes. I can see doing it for the military, or if you actually request one. If you're in West Virginia 4 months out of the year, but you're in the rest of the year, you're in the state of Florida, and that's where your driver's license is. As American citizens, we're entitled to live somewhere 4 months and live in a different state the rest of the time. Now, if that state has enacted a law by its legislature that allows us to vote by absentee ballot, where we can request it and it's mailed to us, and we can mail it in ahead of time, then that's a different thing than what we've allowed here, due to the complete upending of our world with this COVID-19 stuff, where we have to allow anything and everything when it comes to voting, and nothing when it comes to living our lives and operating our small businesses. But that is what they used to argue that they should be able to use these mail-in votes. But really, in none of these states, to my knowledge, did they actually get into a session of their state legislatures and change the law to allow mail-in voting. They just did this through their state executive branches, just like the mask mandates or the lockdown orders. And we'll see if that holds up. It shouldn't, in my opinion. Let's look at Nevada. So Nevada is maybe second to Pennsylvania in the amount of allegations and news about fraud going on. There was a story that, Nevada had at least 200,000 votes that were not signature matched by both a machine and a human being as required by law in Nevada. Additionally, state officials were notified of at least 2 cases where ballots were cast by residents in Nevada who were deceased at the time of the election. So another problem with mail-in votes is, well, what happens if somebody votes, they mail it in, but they die before the election? So technically you had a dead person die. Or what if a family member sent it in and they were dead the whole time? Either is perfectly possible. Now, it's much less possible really we should be, I think the cure to all this is we're going to have to go to like they did it in Iraq. Like we're going to have to go and dip your finger in ink to prove that you've only voted once, and show up in person. I mean, hell, people show up to Walmart. People are showing up everywhere now. And yet we can't show up to vote. And you know that there's not one of the people who have voted by mail, not one who's stayed at their house this entire time, not left their house. There's not one. Guarantee it. Except for you could have the dead voters. They may still be in their house, or you also may have completely, you could have people in a persistent vegetative state who's voted for Biden and they haven't left their house. Those might be the exceptions. There was a whistleblower who worked for Nevada's Clark County elections who listed a series of nefarious behavior incidents that they witnessed in the days leading up to the election. This is a Breitbart story, and they saw non-poll workers forming a human wall near a Biden-Harris van to block the view of individuals purportedly filling out what the whistleblower believes to have been ballots. Nevada Clark County Registrar of Voters, Joe Gloria, said his office has received allegations of voter fraud, but he will not investigate them until, quote, post-election. Now, how is that supposed to work? If there are allegations of fraudulent votes, you're going to wait until, quote, post-election to investigate them. That just means that you don't want to investigate them, or you're not going to investigate them. Post-election would mean after you've certified the results and sent them to Congress to establish who'd been elected president or not elected president. So Nevada doesn't care. Thursday, the Nevada GOP announced that they had referred a criminal referral to Bill Barr regarding at least 3,062 instances that they had found of voter fraud. So the media asked, where's the proof of the fraud? So there have been hundreds of affidavits swearing under the penalty of perjury to fraud so far in these battleground states. Here are 3,062 specific instances of voter fraud referred for potential criminal prosecution to the U.S. DOJ. But I guarantee you nobody in the media has even taken a look at them. Now, I tried to find some of these affidavits. I didn't see whether any of them have made their way into any news reports so far at all. So there was a dead guy. They'd confirmed pretty much for sure, at least one dead guy who voted in Nevada. Say his name was Fred Stokes Jr. So this is how they did it. On October 9th, they mailed him a ballot in Clark County, Nevada, for the upcoming presidential election. It's about 30 days away, less than 30 days away. So 3 weeks later, the county, Clark County, Nevada, confirmed the receipt of that ballot on Halloween. They marked it off as, quote, completed. There remained only one problem with Stokes' absentee ballot counted on the fall holiday. Fred Stokes Jr. had been dead for 3 years. Breitbart, I think, is where I saw this. They had a picture of the guy's gravestone. He died at the age of 92 back in June of 2017, yet he just voted for Joe Biden. So do any of these anchors in the media, does Chris Wallace, does he care that Fred Stokes Jr. died in 2017, yet he voted for Biden? Should his vote count? Should we subtract his vote before the results are certified? Or should we not subtract his vote? If we're going to subtract his vote, shouldn't we subtract other people's votes of people who may be dead? The fact is they just want to rush this through. They don't care about ensuring that the election was free and fair. So there was a lawsuit filed by the Trump campaign on Thursday alleging that there were at least 10,000 people who voted in Nevada who either lived out of state or were already dead. There was a pretty good interview also, I don't know if it was today or I think it was yesterday, of Kristi Noem and George Stephanopoulos. Now, I didn't watch it myself, but I read the transcript and I saw it. I would not watch George Stephanopoulos, but Kristi Noem is a favorite of mine. I wish we could trade South Dakota, North Dakota. Anyways, one of those damn places. I wish we could trade her for our useless governor. I really do. She exemplifies what a governor should have done with all this COVID-19 stuff, is that, look, we'll help you in any way we can, ensure that you can be protected, but we're going to trust you as you're entitled to do, to make your own decisions. We're not going to close your businesses. We're not going to force anything on you. We're going to treat you like Americans. Anyways, I like Kristi Noem. If you've seen my video of West Virginia first meeting Kristi Noem, watch it, because we would take her in a second. So she had an interview with George Stephanopoulos. And so Stephanopoulos is saying, but there's no evidence of fraud. There's no evidence of widespread fraud. And she says, well, if you look at what happened in Michigan, we had computer glitches that changed Republican votes to Democrat votes. You look in Pennsylvania, dead people voted in Pennsylvania. So, George, I know how widespread it is. I don't know if it will change the outcome of the election, but why is everybody so scared just to have a fair election and find out? We gave Al Gore 37 days to run the process before we decided who was going to be president. Why would we not afford the 70.6 million Americans that voted for President Trump the same consideration? And that's exactly right. Is you can look back at the headlines where Al Gore was declared by many newspapers as being the president-elect. And the media gave him 37 days. And then even the Supreme Court, the case is called Bush versus Gore. Bush versus Gore. When really it was Gore doing the challenging. It was Gore and the Democrat Party that held it up for 37 days. And that is when really I first became interested in politics. And I was a political science student in college at the time that this happened. And when I went to law school, this had just happened. So this was big news that was discussed in law school. But Bush versus Gore. This never happened where you had the media and ABC and NBC and all these outlets, congratulating the president-elect and having the graphics of fireworks going off all over the place. No, it was all about nobody knows what's going to happen. It's going to be decided in the courts. And the hanging chads, and Saturday Night Live was even doing the skits at the time mocking the Republican Secretary of State in Florida. And that's really when I first became involved in politics, and I had run for and got on the student senate at my university. And that's when I started going to some of the conservative conventions in Washington, D.C. And I was always going to law school, but that really garnered some of my interest and helped form the reason I see things the way I do. So this will be, I believe, Bush versus Gore or Gore versus Bush on steroids. So if we look at it from a Constitution nerd or political science junkie's point of view, I think a great way of looking at it is this is an interesting time that we're living in, and we are living through history right now. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. So who knows what's going to happen? But either way, it's going to be studied for a long time to come. This is going to make the 37 days of Al Gore trying to take the presidency from George Bush to look like child's play. If there's anyone who has the courage, the guts to take on the entire media and half the country and half the politicians out there to force every letter of the Constitution to be followed before the results are final, it's Donald Trump. I don't think anybody else would do it. I was listening to Sebastian Gorka earlier, and I think he's a brilliant guy, and I always learn something new from him. But it was interesting to see what he said that the president should do. And I think this is a good idea. He said he personally called the president and suggested this. So maybe it's being done. I don't know. But he said create an election integrity task force and have daily briefings. Have daily briefings of all the affidavits showing that felonies had been committed, that dead people had voted. And then he said for everyone else and the Trump supporters, put your red MAGA hat on, get outside in the street and scream and shout your head off. Again, I was listening to Steve Bannon. He said, look, he was kind of armchair quarterbacking. And if you don't know, Steve Bannon had directed Trump's victory 4 years ago. And now he's just watching from the armchair. But he should have been in there in the president's war room, because we might not be in the position that we're in now. This is what Bannon said. He said, if you could go back in time, go back to the state's election results pouring in, and it was looking good for Trump. I mean, in Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, they're pouring in, and Trump has it's looking like it might be a big landslide. He's got substantial margins in all these states. What he would have done in hindsight, which of course is 2020, he said, I would have gone to court immediately to stop any funky counting. So in his opinion, about 2:30 in the morning, things started to kind of go in the opposite direction. Things started to go wrong. But from that point on, I mean, it was looking like this massive victory. If they had gone on offense earlier at that time, who knows, maybe they could have stopped the momentum of what happened when all of a sudden, boom, we have counting through the night. Not people who showed up at the polls and voted, but mail-in ballots from only God knows where. And that's the first time in history that's happened, where states have, in Democrat areas have stopped counting for the night. Next thing you know, next morning, there's just all these votes coming from who knows where. And that's never happened. That's what's necessitating the legal challenge that has to take place if the Constitution is to be respected and to be followed. Let's see. The executive branch is not the judicial branch. I'm a statist. I guess I better read that question. Okay. If you keep deflecting, it's no use. You're lost. The governor heads the state, and law enforcement, besides the sheriff, she has the power to hold people accountable. All right. So I think the response to you from, God, I've already lost it here. There we go. Duck Dodgers. Love the YouTube names. The executive branch is not the judicial branch. I think Duck Dodgers, you're close. The correct response to Mr. Statist is that the executive branch is not the legislative branch. If in Pennsylvania, again, I haven't read the Pennsylvania Constitution, but I've read the West Virginia Constitution, and I imagine they're pretty close. They're all basically set up the same way as a Republican, constitutional republic form of government, tricameral form of government, two houses of the legislature. Generally, the one house will submit a bill, proposed law. They'll pass it. The next house, the upper house, then has to pass it. Then it goes to the governor's desk. The governor signs it. So if we're talking about a law, and our Constitution, Article 1, Section 4 says that the legislatures get to enact the laws on how the people in the states are going to vote, then there's going to be an established law in Pennsylvania that applied before COVID-19. And in order to change that law, the state legislature has to change the law. So what you had instead was Democrat lawyers going into Pennsylvania, Democrat operatives, and getting the county boards of election, or however they did it, to allow, or it could be the governor, but that's all under the executive branch in a state, getting the executive branch to change the rules at the request of the Democrats. So that's the executive branch, which is not allowed to enact laws. A legislative branch enacts legislation, enacts laws. The executive branch, through the governor, signs off on them and then enforces them. So this is a separation of powers argument. So I'm a statist. No, it's not the executive. It's not the judicial. It's the legislative. Okay. All right. You're talking about something else. Running a guy over while he was drunk, and then the governor helped covering it up. That sounds like something I'd be interested in, though. You just got the wrong video. But that sounds like a video I'd like to do. So if you have a video of that, go to my website, the Civil Rights Lawyer, civilrightslawyer.com, and I'll run with that video. In fact, that's what I need to be spending my time on right now, and not politics. Is litigating some civil rights cases and making some money, paying the bills. Now, here's what concerns me most about President Joe Biden. Going back to separation of powers, the president really, you could see how weak I think a president really is just constitutionally, and what they did to President Trump in the past 4 years. I mean, they stopped him from doing a lot. They had him on defense the entire time. And with a Democrat House, he wasn't able to do anywhere near what he could have done without one. So a president really is, by design, hamstrung a lot. Now, a president, like a governor, and they're sort of mirror forms of government, is able to issue what's called executive orders. And that is, by and large, how these governors in the states across the country have been able to enact, or how they did enact, all of this COVID tyranny, the mask mandates, the stay-at-home orders. It's all been through executive orders. Our governor here in West Virginia has enacted so many executive orders, he doesn't even know how many he's enacted, I guarantee you. And you can, if you were to print it out, it'd be, I bet you by now, you're looking at 800 pages probably to print out all of his executive orders since the beginning of COVID, all in the absence of the legislature. So imagine a president doing that. And that's to a certain extent what Obama tried to do. If he couldn't get Congress to enact legislation constitutionally, legally, well, he'd just do it himself through an executive order. The problem with executive orders are that you're not supposed to enact legislation. That'd be unconstitutional, violation of separation of powers. Also, if you can do it by executive order, the next president, it might be the opposite party, they can undo it. So you did see a lot of Obama's executive order policies completely upended by President Trump. And then Biden can do the same to Trump. So laws should not be made by either party via executive orders. But going off of Obama's track record, for which Joe Biden was his vice president, he's going to issue a lot of executive orders. And he's already said that he's getting his pen ready to issue executive orders. So what sort of things is he going to do? Well, according to the Washington Post, he plans to reverse the Trump administration's decision to impose tight travel restrictions for individuals attempting to travel to the U.S. from countries like Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. He's also planning to issue orders to reinstitute protections for illegal immigrants and the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the DACA program, and prioritize family reunification. He also plans to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord and restore U.S. support for the World Health Organization, which Trump had withdrew us from. I'm talking about the Paris Climate Accords. I'm sorry. All right. So let's see. Magus, your video is now getting throttled. Thank you. I think, Magus. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Sounds good if I were to use the word throttled. Let's see. The government sent 1 million stimulus checks to dead people. I wonder how many of them voted. Good point. You know what? You want to know another good point? I came up with this all by myself. I'm sure other people have said it. But my driver's license, which in West Virginia, maybe other states, it will expire on your birthday. Makes sense, I guess. So mine just expired on my birthday. And to be able to renew it, you got to be able to go to the DMV in person and bring like 100 forms of ID and documentation. I mean, you got to bring everything. We all know this. We've all had to do this. Not all of us, but most of us have had to do this. And that's to get a driver's license. You got to bring anything and everything, birth certificates, proof that you live where you're living, everything. And you got to be there in person. So now in West Virginia, of course, being a government agency, the door's locked. You can't just walk in there. There's people in there getting paid, but you can't just walk in. You have to make an appointment. So they extended the date of expiration. Now, that is a legitimate, I'm okay with that. It's a legitimate use of emergency powers by a governor. That's what they're supposed to be. It is to suspend the laws of the legislature during a time of emergency. So a capacity of 300 in a auditorium, hurricane coming, we can get rid of that. We can, as many people as we can fit in there, that's legal. Or there's some reason not to open the DMV. Maybe the place is infested with lice. They lock the door, and it's an emergency. They suspend the driver's license stuff, the renewal requirement. They extend it another 6 months. Whatever. That is the proper use of emergency powers. It's to get rid of the bureaucratic red tape. It's to get rid of government restrictions in order to enable people to get through emergencies. So the answer is always more freedom if there's an emergency. It's not more government. It never is. Like Ronald Reagan said, the scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. Let's see. It's not your driver's license. Read the back. It belongs to the state. Well, I'm not speaking literally here. My point is, which I hadn't really got to yet, is that I have to go there in person. I have to make an appointment, and I have to bring all this proof just to renew my driver's license. And you could say that about other things. And to get renew your concealed weapons permit, any of this stuff, any of these so-called permits from the state, you got to be there in person. Maybe not a hunting license anymore, but if the government deems it to be important, they make you be there in person. But yet with voting, it's not that way now, and so many people are okay with that. Let's see. There was an article that a friend of mine, I think it was Marshall Wilson, had posted it, and he's a legislator here in West Virginia, and he had run for governor here in West Virginia. He posted this article. I knew if he posted it, it was going to be a worthy read, so I'd like to share it. It's called It's called a Tyranny, Perpetual and Universal by Michael Anson. It was found at the AmericanMind.org. I should be able to share it here. It's really a good article, and I definitely recommend it. All right, there it is, I think. All right, so a Tyranny, Perpetual, and Universal. You just go to the AmericanMind.org. It's posted on there. It's a really good article. It's from a few weeks back, but to share, with your friends, family, coworkers, people you disagree with, whatever. But it's a really long article, but it really puts in writing a lot of kind of, I think, what I'd been thinking about a lot of these things, and a lot of things I hadn't been thinking. And it's just a really, really, really well-written article. And it was written before the election, but it really is applicable now. So one of the sections in here is entitled Anarcho-Tyranny. Anarcho-Tyranny. I didn't know that was a word, or the word for it. But let me see if I can find it for you. This is exactly what I've been harping about. So when it comes to freedom, and which side is better for freedom? Because both sides do claim that they're supporting freedom. So here we go. Anarcho-tyranny intensified. So this makes a lot of the points that I've probably mumbled about, but not really been quite clear about. And this is the term I've probably been looking for, anarcho-tyranny. So this is kind of like freedom, but for some, but not for others. Sort of like George Orwell's rule that some animals are more equal than others. And that's always the danger with the left. That's what they're going to do. Yeah, they're for freedom for some people in some circumstances, but for you or I, or definitely anyone wearing a red hat, And definitely for the orange man who they hate, there's going to be less freedom. There's going to be a separate set of rules. So he makes a good point here. Can you remember the last time anyone in Antifa was punished for anything? No. Or these police departments, the NYPD expending significant time and resources. Well, who are they tracking down? The Proud Boys, so-called Proud Boys. Are they attacking or tracking down the Antifa? No. Our FBI is doing the same thing. Are they tracking down any of the conspirators and Russiagate? No. They're spending their time on figuring out who was flying a Trump flag alongside Kamala Harris's bus. So we had the riots, all right? Antifa and the riots, BLM and the riots, wreaking havoc on the streets for 3 straight months. And Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, Cuomo, de Blasio, Lori Lightfoot, all these people, they were almost overtly supporting it. We have the rise of so-called social justice in America. But we have basically all of these rioters, these Antifa types, these Black Lives Matter types who are destroying properties and killing people, really, not being punished. But then you have somebody like Kyle Rittenhouse, who is currently in jail on like $2 million bond, charged with first-degree murder. After having his head bashed with a skateboard, he's being chased by 3 Antifa thugs, one of whom was armed with a Glock pistol. So as the article makes the point right here, the fundamental right of self-defense, the bedrock foundation of all of our rights, is increasingly not honored if you're a member of a disfavored group and your attacker is not. So instead of enforcing the law and maintaining order, these people are encouraging riots, refusing to enforce the law, and they leap into action only when a victim defends himself. This is not incompetence or misguided idealism, it's evil. Should it continue, it will lead either to the collapse of the country or to revolution. And they talk about these red flag laws. Red flag laws. Potential terrorists. Well, who are the potential terrorists? We have AOC talking about making a list right now of anyone who supported Trump. Well, what do you think they're going to do with that list if they have the chance? The ironic thing is that, let's see. The ironic thing is a lot of these people are literally acting like fascists. They're doing what the brown shirts or the black shirts did in Italy or Germany, acting like thugs, engaging in physical intimidation and violence to try to suppress anyone who disagrees with them politically. Showing up at a college where a conservative speaker or a speaker about the Constitution is shouted down, has stuff thrown at them. That's exactly what the brown shirts and the black shirts did. Yet at the same time, those with whom they on their sides, for instance, the brown shirts or the black shirts, I mean, they can kill people, they can beat people. Yeah, they have a lot of freedom to break the law, to engage in anarchy. That's why I guess he's calling it anarcho-terrorism, tyranny. So one class of people has freedom to do whatever they want to do, to the detriment of the other class. And the other class, if they step out of line at all, in their opinion, boom, they get the book thrown at them. But the problem is, and the problem always is with this philosophy is that all these guys always think that they are in the protected class, that they're always going to be in the protected class. But in the end, like the pigs in Animal Farm, they'll be ruling the farm before long. And the useful idiots will find themselves being thrown out of a helicopter. They'll find themselves up against the wall. They themselves will be victimized by what they helped create. Mobile mechanics. Marshall is correct. The question another question is, do Dems know how much all their BS has ended throughout history? I do not know. I think the answer is that most do not. Now, the ones, I don't want to say the ones at the top, because I mean, you still have like the AOCs, and I don't think Bernie Sanders really has a complete grasp of world history or American history. I mean, hell, he took his honeymoon to the Soviet Union. But then you have, I mean, I think you have the other leadership types. You know, Joe Biden, I think, at least back when he was, before dementia set in, I mean, he knew. I mean, you can always turn to George Orwell. I mean, what did the pigs know? Did the pigs know? Did the pigs know that it was all BS? Of course they knew, because they were just smarter than the useful idiots on the farm. What would our founders tell us to do? I think the correct answer to that is that the founders already have told us what to do, and that is the text of the Constitution itself. And the state legislators, this is the elections clause, the state legislatures are to enact the policy of how these elections will be carried out. Then once the election results are certified and the electors cast their vote, then they either reach 270 or they don't. And if they don't, then we were given a mechanism to settle this, and that's in the House of Representatives. And President Trump wins that. He wins that just by virtue of how it's set up between the states right now. So that is the 12th Amendment, and that is the process in place to settle this. So the founders have told us, I mean, there's either an election according to the laws of each state legislature, and if that does not result in valid electoral votes, then the Congress, which is the conference of the states, will decide who, between the top three vote getters, who gets it. Everyone who used guns on each other in a riot should be prosecuted. I just think it's unfair to call one side bad while the other is justified. They all need to go home and call their government officials. Well, in the end, self-defense is self-defense. I mean, talking about Rittenhouse, he's being used as a pawn in something much bigger than him. He's just a small actual person in a large political argument. But the way it's going to happen when he goes to trial, and the way it always should happen, is it's going to be in an individual factual analysis of whether or not he acted in self-defense. So he was armed the way he was armed. He was allowed to be armed in the way he was armed, and he was legally allowed to be where he was. So whether you agree with it or not, or he should have been home, it all comes down to whether or not it was an act of self-defense. So would a reasonable person have feared for their life or serious bodily injury in the circumstances under which he found himself? And that is supposed to be a factual analysis that a jury will decide. Obviously, it's been decided in the media and the court of public opinion with left versus right or point of view, but it's going to have to come down to the individual factual analysis. I mean, was he hit in the head with a skateboard? Yes. Was there a guy attacking him who was armed with a pistol? Yes. I think any court in the land with a police officer shooting in those circumstances would find the police officer not guilty. Now, we can't use the fact that we don't like AR-15s because they're scary, or he shouldn't have been helping to protect private property because that's what the police should do. Those may be valid arguments, but they don't belong in the courtroom when he's in court. So, but you're certainly entitled to your opinion that he shouldn't have been there that day. But also, I would hope your opinion is that the rioters shouldn't have been there destroying private property that day. The fact is he was really the only one, with probably a handful of other people, who had the balls to go do anything. I mean, what kind of a sight was it to see a mob of people destroying a town, destroying the livelihoods of perfectly innocent people? The car dealership that Rittenhouse was there protecting had no dog in the fight one way or the other, had nothing to do with Floyd's death, had nothing to do with it. It was just a complete lack of the local government there to do what had been delegated to them by their state, and that was to enforce the law. One of many of which say that you're not allowed to burn down people's businesses. So yeah, everybody should be prosecuted that engaged in those riots that attacked Kyle Rittenhouse. But last I saw, they didn't charge any of those guys. In fact, the idiot with the gun that survived, the lone survivor of little Kyle Rittenhouse, I mean, he's been kind of lauded in the media as being some sort of hero, lone survivor. But let's see. That's a comment that I support. I wouldn't say I support it. Everyone should own 2 or 3 ARs. Everyone who's not going to use it to hurt other people and destroy their property should have 2 or 3 ARs. I think everybody should have the right to have them, but it doesn't mean I want everybody to have them, just like I don't want everybody to vote. It's like this Facebook constantly pushing people to get out the vote. Now, when I was getting my political science degree, one of the things one of the common themes were that, all right, you could come up with calculations based on characteristics. Well, how old is the person? Young people tend to be more liberal, but they don't vote generally. They didn't vote. They didn't vote at all in any numbers. Of course, things can change. Now, elderly people, generally, they vote. So, God, where was I going with that? All right, everyone should own 2 or 3 ARs. I know, not everyone should vote. Yeah, Facebook. All right. Do you know how to vote? Have you voted? Have you signed up to vote? I mean, constantly, like, yes, Facebook, look at me. Yes, I am registered to vote. I am captain now. It has been since the days of MTV trying to register people to vote. What are they really doing? What have they been doing all these years with this get out the vote stuff? They've been trying to get young people to vote, or minorities to vote who didn't historically vote, say pre-Barack Obama, voted in lesser numbers. The get out the vote is to get people out to vote who didn't otherwise have the interest in politics and therefore didn't have the knowledge in politics. But because of their gender or their skin color or their age, they're predicted by Democrats, by community organizers, to be a vote for them. So they're trying to get out votes for one side. They're taking a partisan position. I think it's a principle we all should be able to agree on, is that no, you shouldn't just to vote. If you don't know what the hell you're doing, don't vote. You shouldn't vote. If you don't know the differences between the people you're voting for, what use is your vote? The only use your vote has is to the group that got you to vote, because they know that you don't know any better than to vote for who they told you to vote for. Informed people should not be voting. That's why we're not a democracy. We're not a democracy. We're a republic, because it has to be, people should have their vote count, but it can't be a pure democracy. It can't be mob rule, because generally the mob doesn't know what it's doing, doesn't know what's there has to be some measure of it needs to be a couple steps removed, at least in the vision of our founding founding fathers. That's why we're not a pure democracy. And you'll see these kind of snarky little memes that are like a GIF or a GIF, however you pronounce that it shows the red America, where people are saying, well, how did Trump lose? Look at America, it's all red. And then they make it come alive and it says, land doesn't vote. And then you see all the cities pop up big blue. It says people do vote. And it's like, wait a minute. As I explained earlier this evening, no. If we're talking about a presidential election, actually, the people you're calling idiots were really right. Land does vote. The states are voting. So all those red states, yeah, those are who are voting. Now, it's somewhere in between because each state, they're not all equal. The ones with all the blue cities in them do have more electoral votes. But land does vote. I mean, actually, you're wrong. It's not a popular election. It's not a popular vote count. It's an electoral college because our founding fathers knew that there's going to be a lot of idiots among us that are going to allow their vote to be fraudulently cast or cast on behalf of other people. And then you'd have states like New York who are trying to control the smaller states below them, like West Virginia or Virginia. I mean, for years, you had the mayor of New York, Bloomberg, coming down into Virginia and getting involved in political elections and trying to force his New York-style gun control on the people of Virginia. Could you imagine if we had a popular vote, what would happen? I mean, New York values and California values they'd be forced on the entire country. And then what would happen? I don't think that the people in West Virginia or really any of these red states, I don't think they'd put up with it. I think you would have had a civil war long before now. Finally, in an intelligent counter argument, suck it up, Buttercup. Trump lost a lot. Biden and Harris. Attitude 3. Actually, attitude, you're wrong. You're wrong. You could say Clinton 4 years ago lost a lot. I mean, that was a bad loss. I mean, what Trump had 306 electoral votes in the end. So Trump won definitely bigly then. Now, if we count just the votes on election night, I mean, Trump was ahead by a lot. If we do count all of these mail-in votes or the mysteriously found votes, from that night or the day after the election, then you have an extremely close, possibly the closest presidential election in American history. So either way you cut it, even if Trump is ultimately fails in his legal challenges or to challenge the certification in these states, I mean, it was still, possibly the closest presidential election of all time. Again, you had 71 million legal votes for Trump, the most that have ever occurred. So it wasn't close either way. It wasn't a landslide for anybody. I mean, even if Joe Biden pulls it out, he has no mandate. He has no mandate. Can you remember the second time that President Bush won re-election in 2004? Do you remember what the news was reporting? That Bush has a mandate. Bush has a mandate. You recall? I mean, Kerry got his ass whooped. Bush won big. That meant, in Bush's mind and in the media's mind, who still to this day pretend like they love President Bush anyways, but if you remember back, it was nowhere near the Trump level, but they hated on him a lot. But they said Bush has a mandate, and therefore he basically got to do whatever he wanted to do the next couple of years because he had a mandate. So even if Biden pulls it out, now the game has changed as far as what the media reports, but he has no mandate. He has no mandate at all. 71 million people voted for Donald Trump. And there's still, as of now, Republican Senate. So there's no mandate, and I don't think the Democrats. I mean, Trump really presided. We're dealing with a couple of battleground states here. Otherwise, Trump did very well. I mean, Ohio, he won Ohio. Florida, he won Florida. I mean, he did very, very well, and much better than McCain ever did, than Romney ever did. I mean, he did very, very well in traditionally tough states, and he brought a lot of people with him. Like here in West Virginia, there was a red wave. I mean, anyone remotely connected to a Republican just destroyed the opposition. I mean, Trump made that happen. There's no doubt Trump made that happen, and he's not going anywhere. He's not going anywhere. He's a leader of tens and tens of millions of patriotic Americans who he has a huge base, as opposed to Biden. I mean, you have an anti-Trump base there, not a pro-Biden base. So Trump has a huge. He's the leader of a huge, as many of the trolls would call, a cult. They think he's a cult because he has such a dedicated base. So Trump's not going anywhere regardless of what happens, in my opinion, anyways. Yeah, and 75 million voted for Biden and Harris. We'll see. That is the point of this video. Did 75 million people vote for Biden and Harris or not? Now, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant either way when it comes to the electoral votes. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. So, and if you take California and New York out of that, then it's most of the country supported Trump. I mean, you can hardly count California and New York. I mean, because that's just a huge number of people. If you were to take them out, that really skews the map. Brett Dorsey, talking about Rittenhouse here, I think. If 3 or more people jump you, it's self-defense. Well, I'm not Wisconsin, I'm West Virginia, but self-defense law is pretty much self-defense law. There are some differences in the states, such as in some states, you have a stand your ground law, or I have another video on that if you can find it. Or some states have a law saying that you can't be the aggressor in a fight or start a fight and then assert self-defense. So there are some differences between states. But as far as there being any rule that if there are 3 or more people who jump you, it's self-defense, I'm not aware of any bright line rules that say that. But that's a great fact to have if you're trying to claim self-defense in a trial, is you got jumped by 3 people. Yeah, that is a great self-defense claim. It's a great self-defense claim. And there have been self-defense claims that have been successful in court involving multiple attackers on somebody for decades. Because what does that do? If you've got 3 people attacking you, that makes it much more reasonable to use a greater level of force than if you have 1 person attacking you. It's like I had a case when I was a prosecutor of it was one guy who had attacked another guy, but the guy who used the force, who was claiming self-defense, he was this big, huge, burly lumberjack. I mean, he's a huge guy. And then the guy that he had testified he was scared to death of was this tiny little guy. I mean, just a tiny little guy. And this wasn't a gun case. So this is a fight case. And it was just sort of laughable. It made people in the courtroom laugh because we all know that he wasn't afraid of that little guy. Now, there can be exceptions. We know that in jiu-jitsu, but still in jiu-jitsu, I mean, you take me and you put me against Little John. Now, if I let Little John behind me, he could choke me out in like 20 different ways. But as long as I don't let him behind me, I mean, he's not going to overpower me. I can stop him from getting behind me. And it's hard to beat raw strength and disparate size. You take a huge guy and a little guy, even with a black belt in jiu-jitsu, you're still going to have a lot of problems. And so you don't have any facts like, they're both jiu-jitsu practitioners. Then it's all a reasonableness. Analysis. So yeah, 3 guys on 1. That's a great case. That's a great self-defense case, assuming you have a fair jury. Now, there's not going to be a juror that they're going to be able to sit who hasn't heard of the case, doesn't have some sort of preconceived notion about the case. And that's going to be a problem because they're not all going to admit it. And so I don't, I don't, I don't envy whoever's going to try his self-defense case when it comes, because that's going to be a huge responsibility, and that's going to be hard to sit a jury. How are you going to know who is biased towards you already and who's not if they don't admit it? And there are ways. Magus, you should make a Discord and stream on other sites. Again, you're using terms that these must be Zoomer terms. I don't know the term, but I am streaming on Facebook and YouTube, so I'm at least doing that. But I'm not sure what Discord is, but I'll check it out. Dan, yeah, but if I can kick the shit out of 20 Antifas, is beating 3 attacking Antifas really self-defense? I mean, they don't even know they were really men. Touche. Fair question. Stop the guy mugging an old lady. I didn't hit him because I'm a big guy. I think it's important to think through self-defense scenarios on your own time before they occur, in my opinion, especially if you carry a firearm, or especially if you're a cop. Even like, you need to think through ahead of time, in my opinion, what am I going to do in XYZ situation? For instance, I personally, like Mike Tyson says, though, and once you get hit in the face, your plan goes out the window. But to the extent that I have a plan, I don't ever want to be in the position of having shot somebody who is unarmed. Like, if I shoot somebody, I want there to be a gun laying next to them, laying next to their dead body, or at least a knife. You could extend that to, I wouldn't want to ever shoot, if you're a cop, I wouldn't want to ever shoot somebody in the back under any circumstances. Because although technically you may be able to do it, was it Tennessee versus Jones or one of those Tennessee Supreme Court cases, you may be able to do it, but it looks bad, and it would be very easy to throw you under the bus, and you might get thrown under the bus. Now, just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should. So I think you should think through some of these likely scenarios before you get into that situation. For instance, if you're Kyle Rittenhouse and you're going to go to protect some dude's car dealership and you're going to be armed, hopefully you will have thought through, well, what am I going to do if I'm attacked by people who I don't see any guns, they're not pointing guns at me? What am I going to do? Am I going to let them wrestle my gun away from me? Am I just going to shoot them because they might wrestle the gun away from me? Those are all very good questions that there's not necessarily a correct answer to, that they can all be strategized before you get into that position. If you live in a high crime area, so to speak, what are you going to do if somebody tries to carjack you? What if they have a gun in their hand? What if they appear to be unarmed? What are you going to do? You going to pull your gun on them, try to shoot them? Another rule, I've been taught this rule by somebody I trust, is if you're armed and somebody else is armed and they're about to commit some crime towards you, maybe rob you, for instance, carjack you, and their hand is already on their gun, you're not going to beat them. Don't go for your gun. Don't do it. If there's any other option, take the other option. Now, that might not be the correct answer depending on the situation, but it is a generalization that it was an educated preparation that you had kind of educated yourself for. Or, what are you going to say if you're involved in a self-defense incident, especially involving firearms? What are you going to say to the police? Do you already have your attorney's card in your wallet? Do you know what you're going to say? Have you thought about it? So these are all things that could be. They can be. You can do. Game these theories in your head. I think an important one, like I said, I don't ever want to be in the position of having a a self-defense shooting involving an unarmed person. If I was a cop or a private citizen, which I'm a private citizen, obviously. But even if I'm a cop, especially in a blue state or city or county, I don't want to be involved. I don't want to shoot anybody who is unarmed, not because it wouldn't be legal based on the circumstances, but because, I mean, you know what's going to happen. And it's going to be a lot easier to throw you under the bus than it's going to be to placate the ensuing mob. SB, I didn't say that Kyle Rittenhouse completely handled himself well. I think that in the specific use of force, self-defense incidents that occurred, I think he handled himself very well, given the decisions that he made. Where I would take issue is what he did is being there in the first place. I don't deny that he had the right to be there in the manner that he was doing it, but I sure as hell wouldn't have let my kid do that for reasons that he's ended up with. You know, I don't want my kid, even if somebody should do something like that, I don't want him to be the one that did it. So I know this will follow him around forever. He'll probably never have a regular life, and he's been in jail all this time, at least in juvenile jail, and they can't even get him out yet. And I agree with that I think it was a good shoot and a hell of a shot, hell of a several shots. That, you know, I've watched a lot of police shooting videos, and I mean, I would have imagined that he was that quick and that accurate. And that last guy did have a pistol. And even if you watch the video, it's very difficult to see it. Panda Army. Can a person take an elected office under a pseudonym name? That's a good question, I think. I guess it would probably be under state law. There might be some federal election law that mentions something like that. I really don't know. I've not been presented with that scenario before. I'm not an academic, so generally I'll learn about something. I either already knew about it or somebody called me or walked through my door. Well, maybe not walk through my door now in the post-COVID world that we find ourselves in. But, you know, metaphorically speaking, someone walked in my door with a case. I'll go learn about it. So I learn by what I have to deal with. Sadly, I have not had any reason to research whether or not someone can run for public office under the name of a pseudonym. I suspect there's state law, possibly federal law, that says that you can't. Again, that's just my guess, though. Daniel Jones, I didn't see what you did, but I'll accept your apology after the fact. Once I go back through and see, you know, whatever awful thing that you did in the chat. Jake, the guy who had the handgun, wasn't he a felon? Wasn't he charged for that at least? I haven't gone back to update myself on the Rittenhouse stuff, but last I did, he wasn't charged with anything. I don't believe. Last I looked, that may have changed. There's been enough other stuff to keep up with. That may have changed, but he wasn't. And kind of like this article that I put up there, the anarcho tyranny. The law doesn't apply to these Antifa attackers. It just applies to little Kyle Rittenhouse, because that's where we're headed. They can break all the laws that they want to, but if somebody like Kyle Rittenhouse, you know, even arguably violates a law, the book will be thrown at him. Hide your guns, Mike Malone. I know there's probably been several boating accidents in recent days, but as far as gun rights are concerned, I mean, we made it through two, I don't know if you want to call it episodes, but let's say, 2 seasons of Barack Obama. And, I think if we made it through, he's like the evil emperor compared to Biden, though assuming that he's not behind Biden now. I've not heard anybody put that theory forward, but I think it's clear to most Americans, even a lot of people who voted Democrat, that the Second Amendment is extremely important now. And I think they understand it. They understand it now. I think the Second Amendment debate is over. Now, that doesn't mean that Biden won't try something, as far as an assault weapons ban. I think he'll try executive orders, whatever he can get away with. But at least as a legislature to stop him at this point. So I don't think it's necessary to hide your guns at this point. But who knows what happens, a few years down the road. I'm a statist. How do you feel about the right screeching about election fraud, but they supported keeping Joe Jorgensen out of the debate? Well, I feel for the libertarians because I probably am a libertarian to a degree, but I've discussed this before. The political reality of more Joe Jorgensen votes, those are all votes that would have helped Trump and would have helped defeat Biden in some of these critical states. I think, what was it in Pennsylvania? There was like 30 something thousand libertarian votes, or maybe I'm thinking of another state, but how much would that have helped in some of these states? So I don't blame the Republican Party for wanting to keep a libertarian candidate who's going to, siphon votes away from Donald Trump out of the debate. It's not like Donald Trump was Mitt Romney or McCain. He has his flaws, but he's the closest thing to a libertarian they've ever had on the ballot, as far as I'm concerned. So I understand that, but I would like to see the rise of some sort of additional political parties. How does that happen? Is it even possible now that we are where we are? I really don't know. Yeah, and Duck Rogers that's the better response probably, is where this needs to be handled is within the primaries. So the libertarians, in my opinion, they need to get involved with the Republican primaries, because that's just, in the presidential election, that's where we are. Is I don't see a two-party system going anywhere. And so get involved in the primaries. I think I think the landscape is ripe for libertarian ideas right now, with all the lockdowns in all these states, and people, I think they really understand the importance of constitutional rights now. So rather than just sticking within the Libertarian Party, why not change the Republican Party? Look how much it's changed from George W. Bush to now with Trump. BK Greg, I believe you're right. Biden did say something like, "Come on, man. Back when I was growing up, we just grab a double gauge shotgun and rack it in the racket. If they still try to break in your house, and you just shoot them through the door, shoot them in their knees. Come on, man." Yeah, something stupid like that. All right. Juan, what are your thoughts on first and second choices for president on ballots for next election? Well, let's wait and see what happens with this election. I'm not giving up yet with this election, because the fact is that it's not up to the media. There still has to be the casting of those electoral votes, and there cannot be the casting of electoral votes from Pennsylvania or Nevada or Georgia or Michigan until the litigation is sorted out in those states, and the issues of whether law has been complied with in those states has been settled. So there's still time for that. Now, I think because my answer would depend on what happens. I mean, if Trump wins, you have different potential candidates than if Trump loses. I mean, if Trump loses, he could run again. And I think he's the most popular Republican candidate of all time and potentially person of all time as far as American politicians goes. And I mean, it seems like tiger blood right now. I mean, he has way more energy than I do. And that may not be saying much, but he's nuts. I mean, Bill Clinton was like that too, to a certain extent. I mean, some of the Secret Service guys, you used to hear him talking that they just couldn't keep up with him. I mean, he's up all hours of the night drinking and gambling. And Trump's sort of the same way. I mean, he's all all the time. He's like nonstop. I don't see him being a whole lot different in 4 years. I think him running again after this election, if he loses and it's this close, I'm not going to dismiss him running again in 4 years. I mean, hell, he could campaign for the next 4 years. Can you imagine that? And that might be a more powerful footing to be in than as the president that has all sorts of weaknesses with a Democrat House, with the rules that he has to follow as president. Can you imagine if he's a candidate for the next 4 years? Now, if he wins, I think a lot of, and even if he doesn't win and doesn't run again, I like Trump Jr. I mean, I really do. I'm not in favor of political dynasties, and even had I liked what was his name, Jeb Bush, who was the governor of Florida. Even had I liked him, I think that's just too much of one family to have as president of the United States. And maybe my mind will change based on a change in circumstances. But I really didn't like that. I didn't think people liked that with Bush. Now with Trump, I think Trump Jr., from a freedom perspective, from a Second Amendment perspective, I mean, we know that he is probably the biggest voice in his father's his father's family and advisors about the importance of not just the Second Amendment in general, but of other things connected to it. I know he knows he's dealt with a lot of Class 3 stuff and suppressors and a lot of modern issues having to do with AR-15s and things of that nature that his father, I'm sure, has never really encountered. So I think I think it's a principle. If you're good on the Second Amendment, on gun rights, you're good on almost all the freedom issues. Now, not all of them, because then you still have a lot of the drug laws and possession laws that some of the Second Amendment advocates can get too carried away, worried about pot needles and so on. But I don't see that as Don Jr. being like that. But there are others I like. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about her, and she's got a lot of growing to do. But I like Candace Owens. I mean, she is a wonderful speaker, and look how important that is. But she's able to speak off the top of her head and articulate her ideas to people. Now, is she good on a lot of those things like I like Don Jr. for? I don't know. But I think there's a deep bench of people on the Republican side. And of course, Cruz is still there. I like Cruz. I mean, especially right now, we're looking at all these constitutional issues. I mean, isn't it, if he hadn't been senator, I mean, that's who we needed as the attorney general all this time. But his seat was so important as senator, I know. But I mean, there are a lot of good choices. But look at the other side. Look at the choices that they went through to get to Biden. I mean, it was just between bad and worse and worser. And there's no bench there at all, other than the extreme leftist side of the Democrat Party, like AOC and Ilhan Omar. I mean, I don't see a whole lot of promise for them getting any sort of mainstream votes in America and the 4 years down the road, or even eight years down the road. Yes, that's who I forgot. Thank you, Klein. Kristi Noem. Yeah, I'll amend my answer that she might even be my first choice. I really love Kristi Noem. I admit I don't know everything about her. I don't know everything about her, but as far as everything that I've seen lately, her response to all the COVID stuff, her her policy as a governor of a state to err on the side of freedom rather than the side of restriction and tyranny. I think if you come down that way as Kristi Noem has, there are so many other issues that I think that predicts how you would come down. I can't imagine her being that bad on many other issues. And I don't think anybody needs to be perfect anyways. You don't have to agree 100% with somebody to support them as a candidate. And you shouldn't agree 100% with anybody. But I do really like Kristi Noem. And she has what it takes to go very far, and I think in a presidential race. All right. Well, thanks for watching. I need to head out as well. And if you need to contact me, or please do follow on the website at thecivilrightslawyer.com. Wait, sorry, Klein, I need to get rid of your comment. Follow along at civilrightslawyer.com. I'll put that up. That's where I do my blogging and writing. And I also post links to some of the videos I make. And make sure to subscribe on YouTube if you haven't. I mean, you could follow not just the live videos I do like this, but also a lot of the cases I actually litigate as a civil rights lawyer, many of which are extremely interesting. And also, if you, again, like somebody said, if you have any kind of crazy police videos or governor videos, whatever the case may be, go to the website, get them to me. I will take a look at them. And I like video cases. They are the ones to litigate. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. And in the meantime, just keep your chin up and have faith in the Constitution, because I do.